Millions of years ago, nature and time molded the landscape on which Motor Mill now stands. This area of North America was part of a vast, shallow inland sea once located near the equator. Corals and other marine life left behind calcified skeletons, fossil relics of which can be seen in the bedrock around Motor. Starting 300 to 400 million years ago, these skeletons and lime-rich mud became sediments whose weight compressed them into limestone. Over the eons, layers of limestone hundreds of feet thick built up on the ocean floor. Eventually, several ice sheets formed over that limestone, but the last glaciers to cover this part of what is now Iowa melted more than 500,000 years ago. Since then, rivers and streams have drained the land, carrying away glacial drift and carving deep, scenic valleys into the limestone. The lack of glacial deposits gave rise to the term driftless area. Cracks in the limestone allowed water to percolate through, forming the springs and sinkholes of karst. The steep bluffs and narrow gorges made ideal sites for dams to provide water power for mills.
Motor Mill was the vision of three men: John Thompson, an entrepreneur and millwright from Elkader, with two other mills constructed under his guidance; James Crosby, a respected lawyer from Garnavillo; and Jotham Pratt Dickinson, a mill operator and handyman from Claremont. Mill operations were not new to Northeast Iowa. When Motor Mill was built, multiple mills of various sizes were seen on many rivers and tributaries. The vision of John Thompson was to build his third mill, the biggest and finest in the upper Mississippi Valley. Motor Mill's construction began in 1866, just 1 year after the end of the Civil War. Although Northeast Iowa lost many soldiers in the war, the forests, waterways, and farmland were spared. With those natural resources and advances in agricultural production, milling promised speculators a bright future. To help complete the mill, Thompson formed John Thompson and Company in October 1867. But why the name Motor? Motor was the name given by John Thompson in 1867. At the time, motor power was a new term borrowed from the German word Motor, the meaning being a driving force. The men wanted people to think of their enterprise as a center of industrial activity, a new town to be born which was centered around milling. The mill itself took 3 years to build. Mill construction began in 1866 and was finished in November 1869. All materials were local. Extensive forests provided wood for the massive support beams. Imagine the trees from which the 14-inch beams were taken. Limestone was quarried from the hill overlooking the site. Stonemasons dressed the stones atop the hill, then lowered them on a 2-track railcar system which James Crosby had devised. The weight of stone in one car descending to the work site would pull the other car back to the quarry. The Turkey River provided ample power to drive the turbines under the mill. These turbines were far more compact and efficient than the traditional water wheel. A dam 100 feet upriver from the mill extended across the river 190 feet. An elevated wooden flume or channel directed the water to the mill. 3 turbines generated the power to turn 4 grinding stones, and a 4th turbine provided power to equipment throughout the mill. To improve transportation and access to Motor, a bridge was needed. Built during the mill's construction in 1868 and costing $5,000, a high-sided wooden bridge was built across the Turkey River. Altogether, construction of the bridge, the mill, a cooperage, inn, stable, and smokehouse, and the mill's machinery cost about $100,000, a considerable sum in those pioneer times. In 1898, a 2-span iron bridge was built as a replacement for the wooden bridge. After major flood damage to this bridge in 1991 and 2008, a replica was completed in 2012. The mill is 84 feet tall, 60 feet long, and 45 feet wide, with 6 floors and a basement. The foundation walls are 5 feet thick. Each floor is stepped back approximately 6 inches so the supporting beams for the next floor can rest on the inset stone. Because of this tapering effect, the stones at the top of the mill are only 2 feet thick. Oak beams on the bottom floor are 14 inches square and held in place by gravity. No nails or pins were used in building the mill frame except in the attic and basement. The mill stones were from France. They are a special burr quartz, harder than granite. These stones were prized for their hardness and ability to keep a sharp cutting edge. The stones were not all of one piece. Smaller stones were cut, shipped, and reassembled at the mill and banded together with iron to form the cutting surface. The bed stone was stationary. The runner stone was suspended above the bed stone and turned to create the cutting action. Elevators and augers moved grains throughout the mill. Gravity brought the processed grains back down in each succeeding step of the milling process. To send the finished product to market, bags and barrels were filled and sent out on wagons. The cooper made the barrels in which the flour was shipped. The cooperage had 2 floors and an attic with 2 coopers busy at their trade. Wood staves banded together with iron hoops formed a barrel. Each barrel contained the equivalent of 4 48-pound sacks of flour, or 196 pounds of flour. There is very little information about the success of the mill from 1870 until September 1879, when John Thompson and James Crosby rented the mill to Gilbert Thompson and Theodore Ponzar, 2 young entrepreneurs who made a name for themselves in milling both in the local area and beyond. Through weekly advertising in local newspapers, they expanded the customer base and offered custom grinding and exchange. By February 1880, they were making an average of 30 barrels of superfine flour per day and were selling much of their product to the Dubuque market as well as Chicago and as far as Pittsburgh. In a test by 4 prominent bakers in Dubuque, the motor mill flour was the winner. Their continued success was evident from newspaper articles reporting a booming business in grinding. Corn and buckwheat were ground at times during the mill's history as well. An 1866 law had declared the Turkey River non-navigable, so transporting grain and flour by water was not an option. John Thompson and Company therefore sought to bring the railroad through Motor. 2 attempts were made, but flooding doomed both ventures.
Motor Mill had many setbacks over its 13 years of operation. Several things contributed to its early closing as a mill. By the time the mill began production in December 1869, stone grinding was being replaced by steel roller grinding, which was better able to break the hard kernels of winter wheat. Another major factor was the advent of trains, offering a faster and more efficient way of bringing product to distant markets. Farmers could raise corn to feed cattle and hogs and sell the livestock, butter, and cheese at a greater profit than selling their wheat. Several poor wheat crops due to drought, rust, and chinch bugs, and farmers changing crop production from wheat to corn, doomed wheat's future in Iowa. Many mills were converted to creameries. Flooding was a constant concern for the mill. The first months of operation in 1870 saw major damage from spring flooding when the flume wall was washed out and had to be rebuilt. Damage to the bridge piers in 1871 required their reconstruction. An ice upheaval in 1880 once again damaged the flume wall. In July 1883, a major flood caused enough damage to the dam, flume, and wooden bridge that operations at Motor Mill as a grist mill ceased forever. John Thompson and James Crosby were no longer interested in funding what they saw as an outdated business. In the years after the mill closed, Thompson rented the land to local farmers for crop production. The mill was used primarily for hay storage, and the main floor even housed livestock. In 1903, Lewis Klink purchased the mill property. In September of that year, a scrap dealer from Dubuque, Iowa, gutted the mill of most of its machinery, ensuring its end as the grist mill. It's interesting to note that James Crosby considered the possibility of the mill being reconstructed for hydroelectric power. In a conversation with a group of young people around 1900, he said, "It requires no prophetic vision to guess that this mill will, like others, experience revival of life and someday house electric power that will supply a half-dozen counties with light and power. Well, the power is there and the building is there." But that vision was never truly realized. Instead, Motor Mill became a favorite picnic and fishing destination at the start of the 20th century.
Throughout the subsequent years, the mill and buildings became a part of an agricultural community. In 1977, the Klink family realized the historical value of Motor Mill and successfully applied to have it listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In 1983, the Clayton County Conservation Board, with the assistance of the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, purchased 100 acres of the mill property, including 40 acres on which the 5 stone buildings sit, and 60 acres across the river from the mill. In 1992, another 55 acres of land was purchased from Mildred Beck. The additional land completed the site by acquiring the area where the town of Motor was platted. In 2004, the Motor Mill Foundation was formed to aid in the restoration of the mill and other stone buildings. This organization is still an integral part of the preservation and interpretation of the mill site. In recent years, preservation efforts at Motor Mill have aided in the recovery of historic milling equipment, including 2 wooden turbines reclaimed from the flood sediment deposited in the mill basement. A platform was built in the basement to provide visitors a closer connection to the confluence of river and power generation that operated the mill. An interpretive master plan was compiled and used to proceed with interpretive signage to educate visitors, and an instructional guidebook for the volunteers. Milling equipment was returned to an upper floor in the mill to showcase the grain-to-flour production process. The inn welcomes visitors to Motor once again and offers guests overnight accommodations. The stable, once housing dairy stanchions, is now reopened to the public as a small venue for family gatherings, community concerts, and other events that support the site. These projects have aided in the Foundation's overall mission to protect and preserve architectural integrity, history, natural beauty, and serenity of the Motor Mill site and its surroundings, and to develop appropriate uses and interpretations as a regional treasure for the benefit of future generations. The mill's long-term vision is to provide visitors with the opportunity to experience the story of Motor Mill and explore the mill site, increasing their understanding and appreciation for the preservation and interpretation of this unique historic district.
Today, the Motor Mill Historic Town Site is a perfect place to step back in time and get away from the modern world. A favorite way to visit Motor Mill is to paddle or tube the Turkey River from Elkader to Motor Mill. Past the mill is the campground and canoe access where the town was once located. Another popular way to enjoy the site is to explore it on a hike. The Robert Graw Memorial Savannah was established in 2005 and offers a peaceful hike above the mill through the forest and the Oak Savannah restoration. One of Clayton County Conservation's most popular sites, visitors love Motor Mill for its scenic beauty, tranquility, and historic past. We hope you have enjoyed this brief overview of the historic Motor Mill. Come enjoy a tour with one of our guides. Bring lots of questions as they tell you more about the amazing history of Motor Mill.